Hey everybody, hope everybody's having a good weekend, and I hope it's not just blast furnace hot as hell where you are like it is here. I'm very ready for August to be over with and go away and to get back into fall and nice, refreshing, cool weather. But enough of that. So yeah, Rolling Stones album reviews. I'm carrying on. I'm doing the albums in order of release. So I get the displeasure, probably the best word, of coming to this album, Dirty Work, released March 24th, 1986. It got to number 4 in America and in England as well. Got to number 4. A fraught period for the band. There was a lot of dissension, a lot of infighting. This is their first album on a new label, Columbia. They had former label contracted run out with the previous album Undercover. They signed a new contract with Columbia to deliver however many Rolling Stones albums. Got a big payday out of it. Unbeknownst to the rest of the band, Mick Jagger also went back and signed a separate contract for solo albums in addition to the Rolling Stones albums, and got paid extra money for that. The band, of course, found out about that. They were not happy about not having been told about that, and Keith also wasn't really crazy about Mick concentrating on solo albums. He thought everybody should be concentrating on the Rolling Stones instead. Mick thought he was going to go off and become the next Rod Stewart or Phil Collins or Neil Young or whatever, I guess. His solo album She's the Boss came out in 1985. Got a lot of airplay on MTV and the radio. Something of a hit. Pretty lousy album. Subsequent solo albums got less and less exposure until he finally just stopped doing them. None of them were that I've heard. I bought She's the Boss. Didn't think it was very good. I never bought Primitive Cool or the other ones. So what I heard of them, I didn't think much of them, that they were any good. So there's also Live Aid the year before in July of 1985, where you had the public display of Stones animosity, Mick Jagger appearing by himself, and then Keith and Ronnie, I think Bob Dylan was with them, appearing separately. They couldn't even make amends for the day to bring the band together to appear at Live Aid. Spin Magazine, I'm not sure if that even exists anymore, started up around 83, 84. It was supposed to be, I guess, another version of Rolling Stone. Wasn't a very good wasn't a very good magazine. Of course, Rolling Stone's not a very good magazine either, but it did have a few good articles here and there. And I remember around the time of this album, there was some Rolling Stones on the cover of the magazine, and the headline was "It's almost all over now," and the gist of the article being that they probably wouldn't last much longer, that Mick and Keith would go their separate ways into solo directions, and the rest of the band would, who knows what would become of them. Of course, 35 whatever years on, that couldn't be further from the truth because they're still chugging along. But in 1986, it did sort of look like they might not last too much longer. So this is kind of where I get off the Rolling Stones bus. Not kind of, it is. This is the last album of theirs that I bought. The one exception, I did buy one of the subsequent albums, but otherwise I never bought another Rolling Stones album again. The lead single from this came out before the album. I was thoroughly underwhelmed by it. We'll get to that when we get to the track-by-track listing. But I did go out and get this, as I had previous Rolling Stones album has always been a big deal. Got to rush out and buy them on the first day affair, and I did with this too. I don't know that I technically got it on the first day, but I got it when it came out, the first week or whatever, and I thought it was awful. And I played it, a handful of times, quite a few, several times back in 1986. and I thought, maybe it'd grow on me or whatever, and it just didn't. So eventually I put it on the shelf with my other records to collect dust, and there it sat for 3+ decades. I don't think I've listened to it since. I knew this review was coming up, so I dragged it out, gave it several listens, quite a few listens actually, to refamiliarize myself with it. I was hoping that, because that's happened on albums that I didn't like way back when, that I heard years later and came to like. I was hoping something like that would happen. It didn't. I was hoping there'd be some undiscovered gems here. There aren't. The last album, Undercover, that I reviewed a couple of weeks ago, isn't a great album, but there's 10 songs on it, and I hadn't really heard that or played that too much in the years since it came out either. But since I did the review, I've been playing it because it was still on the record player, so I played it several times in the last week or two. A couple of songs really grew on me, but out of the 10 songs, 3 of the songs I quite like, 2 of the songs are pretty good, and the other 5 songs are just filler. So you got a half good album. Unfortunately, with this, you've got a no good album. So I went out and I bought this, and looking at the list of contributing musicians who appear on here, it's promising because there's some top flight talent. You've got Jimmy Page, Tom Waits, Don Covey, the old soul singer from the 60s. He sang Seesaw and several of his other great soul songs back in the 60s. Jimmy Cliff, reggae star. You got Patti Scialfa, I guess that's how you say her name, I never was sure, Bruce Springsteen's wife. You got Kirsty MacColl, who's not so much known in America, but They Don't Know, the song by Tracy Ullman that was a hit in America back in 83 or so. 83 I think is when that came out. Kirsty actually did that originally. I think she wrote it. She might not have wrote it, but she's the original singer, had a hit with it in England. And she had a lot of other songs that are really good too, in addition to They Don't Know. But she was known and big in England. Really great, really good singer, and some worth checking out, even though she was never that known in America. She tragically died in a boating accident, so was no longer with us and gone too young. But a huge talent there, Kirsty MacColl. So you got this top flight talent, and you would hope that would add something to the album. It just doesn't, unfortunately. And I know, try not to turn away in horror and disgust. That cover, man. I know it's the 80s. I know that a lot of the and I love 80s music, don't get me wrong. I love the stuff up through the first half of the 80s. There's a lot of great stuff. Second half of the 80s, there's a lot of cheesy, processed, sort of just corporate, slick, soulless music. Some good stuff still, but not as much. And music, as I've said many times, in my opinion, really kind of around the time of Live Aid, around 85, just everything went pear-shaped, and it's been pretty downhill and lousy ever since for the most part. But first half of the 80s was great. But for these 60s and 70s icons, the 80s were not so kind on them. And a lot of them, it's not just the Rolling Stones, Paul McCartney, Neil Young, The Who, most all of these guys went through rough times and confusing times for them, and weren't really sure where to fit in, and tried to follow the trends and looked silly and made some kind of ridiculous and goofy albums. And to the Stones' credit, I mean, they made 2.5 good albums in the 80s. And they got to this and just hit the skids, and total failure on all fronts, unfortunately. But man, I hope that in the years since, they've had the common sense and the decency to toss those Crockett and Tubbs threads onto a raging bonfire, because it looks like they're backstage waiting for their special guest appearance on an episode of Miami Vice. I know that Jeff Calico Silver, he reviewed this album. He gave it a positive review. He likes it. I'm usually pretty in line with his views on Rolling Stone records here. We're gonna kind of agree to disagree, I think. He said that they look like New Kids on the Block, which they kind of do, even though I think that band was a few years away at this point. Either way, it just looks totally ridiculous. And I mean, I know you can go back to Satanic Majesty's Request album cover, and it looks pretty silly there too, but that was the 60s, and that was the Summer of Love and the psychedelic stuff, and that is a very good, albeit flawed album. And there's something kind of cool about them dressed up like wizards and stuff. It was ridiculous, but it's kind of cool. This is just uncalled for and ridiculous. So you got that. You got the there's the back of the album, which isn't much any better. Song track listing, not in the order that it appears on the actual album. Inner sleeve, you've got some kind of cartoon about the dirty workout that's not really funny and not much point to it. It's just sort of I don't know. We've got lyrics, got these little illustrations that kind of look like sort of like Ralph Steadman illustrations, but I don't think they are. And I can't find on here, I don't think it says who did the illustrations. I don't think it was Steadman, but anyway, you got the lyrics. Just a garish, unappealing, ugly album presentation overall, in the whole packaging there. Not good at all. Yeah, so we said this is a no good song album, but let's get into the songs. First song, there were two 45s released from this album, and the first song is One Hit to the Body. This was the second 45 released from the album. It got to number 28 in America, so it didn't do too great, but it did better than it did in England. It only got to number 80 there, and I think that was their lowest charting single ever, or lowest charting single to that point in England. Anyway, Jimmy Page is on here, plays a guitar solo. You think that's cool. It's not. It's nothing special, and it's hard to really tell where he starts and where Ron and Keith leave off. Compare this to Scarlet, the unreleased track that came out with the when they did when they did Goat's Head Soup re-release a couple of years ago with the extra bonus tracks, and Page appears on that track Scarlet, which is really a fun, good track that should have been on the album. It's a shame it wasn't, because it's a great track. Here you got Page. It's just this listless, uninspired guitar contribution, but this is a listless and uninspired song. This is terrible. It's got the backup girl singers, which can be great, but this is that cheesy mid to late 80s beer commercial soundtrack backup girls singing that's just goofy and cheesy and bad. Just late 80s excess all over this track. Bland, pointless, epitome of generic this song is. And there's a lot of anger and violence and graphic imagery all over this. I'm not really sure why. Maybe it's because they were not getting along as a band, and a lot of this the band was rarely all together in the studio in the making of this album. It'd be Mick and Ronnie, Keith and Ronnie, and then Mick would come in later and do his parts. Charlie was out. He was having problems with heroin and so forth. That's why they didn't tour for this album, which was the first album they hadn't toured for since forever, really. So One Hit to the Body was a 45. I'm not sure why. It's just as bland as can be. Doesn't really even sound like the Stones too much. It sounds like one of those cheesy mid-level 80s bands that would contribute a soundtrack song to some Charlie Sheen cinematic crap fest movie like No Man's Land or the Wraith or something. It's just I was gonna give it a 1, but I thought, man, I can't give this song a 1 because that's too much. One hit to the body gets a 0 from me. We move on to the second song on side 1 called Fight. More violent imagery, beat you to a pulp of a mass of bruises and just all sorts of stuff like that. It's a little more life to it than One Hit to the Body. Slightly better song, but only slightly so. It's still pretty forgettable, as are most every song on this album. So Fight doesn't get a 0. Fight gets a 1. And that's the thing about this album is even my least favorite Rolling Stones album, not counting this one, is Black and Blue, but that has its moments and some pretty good moments. It's just in the overall, I don't think it measures up to the rest of their albums, but it's got their moments. And every album, and Undercover is not a great album, but it's got its moments. And there's really nothing here. There's no hooks. There's nothing to sink your teeth in to on this album. No catchy songs or no memorable songs. Most of this stuff, and I played this and I forgot what a dreary chore it is to get through this album. I was trying to, it was like running a 10-mile race in the 100-degree heat, especially when you get to side 2 and you're just like, come on, when's this thing gonna end? But you play the album and you think back, and most of the songs you can't really remember because there's just nothing to them. And a lot of the stuff, it's got that, they're trying to be hip and up with the times, or Mick is anyway, so it's got that mid-late 80s sheen to it of just sterile, all the snot and vinegar and fun and dirt and grime and passion and life sucked out of the songs, and they're just these sealed in lucite, lifeless songs that just don't hold up and you don't remember them. So anyway, we get to number 3, and this was the lead-off single of the album, Harlem Shuffle. This song is a cover. That's kind of weird because this is 1986, the last time the Rolling Stones, and they did a lot of covers early on, like did the Beatles and the Kinks and the Who and everyone else, and they did a great job with the covers, just like the Beatles did back in the 60s, but they had not released a 45 that was a cover song since 65. I think Under the Boardwalk was the last cover song they released as single, and so that's 21 years earlier, back in the Brian Jones days and just starting out days. But here they come with Harlem Shuffle. This is an old Bob and Earl song from 1963. It's a good upbeat soul song, Bob and Earl's version, which is better than the Stones version. The Stones version, the 45, got to number 5 in the United States. In England, I didn't write it down, but I think it got to number 18 or 20 or something. It didn't do so great over there. The Bob and Earl version, upbeat, it's a party, you're at a dance, having a rave up at a soul party type song. It's not the greatest song in the world, but it's a good soul nugget from back in the 60s in Bob and Earl's hands. And a song like that should be upbeat and bouncy and hey, 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 with the Harlem Shuffle. In the Stones' hands, their recording is just anemic. It's just a molasses pace to it. This is a song that deserves some hey, 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 and it's just like hey, 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 it's a Harlem Shuffle. Very boring, very dull, and probably their worst 45. I guess One Hit to the Body was a 45 too, so that would count. But those two are probably the 2 worst 45s the band ever released. Like I said, I didn't follow the albums after this, the Bridges to Babylon and Steel Wheels and all. I do remember some of the songs that got airplay from that I guess were 45s, the Never Make a Saint Out of Me, and I can't remember the others off the top of my head, and those weren't very good, but they weren't as bad as this. So Harlem Shuffle a strange choice that they do a cover version for the lead single. I guess that goes back to that Mick and Keith just weren't getting along and weren't working together and writing together very much at this point of their career. Harlem Shuffle gets a 2. It's if you got to hear the song, which is no masterpiece to begin with, but if you got to hear the song, stick with Bob and Earl's version from back in the 60s. Okay, we go to song number 4, which is called Hold Back. This is kind of a seize the day, go for it, take your chances, don't just sit on the sidelines. It's got some sort of Mick Jagger with his doing the growling punk rock vocals here, trying to have some attitude, but it's all sound and no fury. Processed, soulless 80s guitar sound, sort of like the guitar solos on Michael Jackson's Bad album or something, just that sort of digital, perfectly processed, but no grit or attitude or soul to it guitar sound. Stupid lyrics. If you look into your history books, you delve into the past. Sort of Mick stating the obvious there. The silly lyrics. Another, just doesn't really sound like the Rolling Stones. Sounds like a Mr. Mister song or Dire Straits, Walk On By, Walk a Life type crap song, or one of those crappy Clapton 80s songs when he just, delivered those just bland as hell songs, and this sounds like that. So, Hold Back, is that what that's called? I already forgot. That gets a 2. And hello? Yeah. Okay, I'll be there. Yeah, I will. Alright. Alright, bye. Anyway, apologize for that. I had to take that. Yeah. Too Rude is the first. This is the first album where you got 2 Keith songs, which would usually be good news. Here, not so much. Too Rude is Keith singing. This is a cover version by a guy named Half Pint. Reggae dub song. Keith singing. Sort of, kind of sounds like some of the stuff the Clash did on the Sandinista album back in '80. And, not as good as that though, but it's nice, it's fun, it's kind of bouncy, but not very memorable, pretty forgettable. It's okay. Keith's song is always cause for celebration, but in this case not so much. Too Rude gets a 3, so I guess that's the best song on side 1, and there's not much to that. We go to side 2, Winning Ugly. Again, doesn't sound like the Stones much. It's got the terrible backing vocals by the girls. This is a song chiding 80s excess, materialism, nationalism. So, I guess some good points there. Another bland and forgettable song, though. It gets a 2 for Winning Ugly. Back to Zero. This is about, because you had the Cold War stuff going on at that time, and Mick Jagger singing about how he doesn't want to pop in a nuclear bomb explosion. He'd rather just grow old and die of old age. Musically, this is okay, but it doesn't sound like the Stones. It sounds like a musical youth song, or sounds kind of like a poor man's Duran Duran song. These songs are like 3 and 4 minutes, but they all seem like they last a lot longer on this album. It seems like each one of them is like 15 minutes long, because they're just so pointless and boring and hard to get through. Back to Zero, it gets a 3. Dirty Work, the the title track, a little bit more energetic than anything else so far on this album. Mick finally sounds like Mick Jagger. Some okay guitar work on here. So some improvement, but still a pretty forgettable song in the end. And give it a 3. I give it a 3.5, but I can't go any higher than that. Had It With You. Here's some classic Stones sound somewhat. It's the Stones doing the blues, making the Stones doing the blues. It's got some pretty cool spoken word bit about 3/4 of the way through the song, which is fun. But again, it's too little too late, and really once you listen to the song, it's hard to remember it. It's kind of forgettable. So I'll give it a 4, and that's the best on the album so far with Had It With You. The album ends with another Keith song, and this one is better than the Too Rude song, but Sleep Tonight, which is a song that he wrote. It's credited to him and Mick, but Mick wasn't around. Him and Ronnie pretty much wrote it. Tom Waits shows up here playing piano. Soulful piano ballad. It starts off promising. You better get some sleep tonight. That part when he's singing that I really like. The rest of the song, it sounds like it's about to come together in parts here and there and lead to something, but then it never really does, never really goes anywhere. It's a bit of a grower. The more I listened to it, the more I kind of came to like it. I guess it's the best song on the album, but it's far from essential or a masterpiece, and Keith did a lot better in earlier albums with his other songs. So this is a good Keith song. It's not a classic Keith song. I'll give it a 4.5, best song on the album. There's a hidden track or an extra track. Ian Stewart, the band's long-term piano player who'd been with them since the beginning, since before they were famous, he passed away. He was around during the making of this album, but passed away shortly before it came out. So there's a snippet, about 30 seconds, of him playing piano, playing Keys to the Highway, an old Big Bill Broonzy song. Big Bill Broonzy is one of the great old blues guys, Muddy Waters and Howlin' Wolf. He was around back in those days. Unfortunately, he died in, I think, 1958. He was a big influence on the Stones and the Yardbirds and a lot of those people, but where Muddy Waters and Howlin' Wolf were still around, so they were able to get some acclaim from and being highly touted by the Rolling Stones and Yardbirds and those bands. Big Bill Broonzy died a few years before all this happened, so he's not as well known, but definitely worth checking out. But Keys to the Highway is a great song. This is not with a vocal, this is just a piano, and it's only, like I said, about 30 seconds, so it's hard to rate it. It's nice. It's a nice tribute to Stewart, and it's nice to hear a little bit of Big Bill Broonzy. It's a shame it wasn't the whole song. Yeah, this album, from here on out, like I said, I never bought any of the albums, except I did, for some reason, when it came out in 2005, get the Big Bang, or Bigger Bang, or Big Bang. I'm trying to look at some of the CDs over there, and I can't remember what the damn thing's called. Big Bang Theory, whatever. That album, I didn't like much either. I've thought through the years I should probably revisit it just to see if it's any good, but every time I think I should revisit it, I'm like, not today, maybe some other time. So I didn't get the rest of their albums. I did see them live again. I saw them in 81, like I said on earlier videos, and I saw them in 1989. I think that was the Steel Wheels tour, which was a pretty okay show. But I've seen them not live in person, but they did an HBO concert and some other things. And from this point, for me, I always loved the old Stones. I love the albums. Listening to this, it's stunning. It's just hard to believe that these are the same guys that did Between the Buttons and Beggar's Banquet and Some Girls and Exile and Aftermath. And I give this album a 2 in the overall. And from this point on, the band, to me, going forward, they just kind of become performing seals. They become a trademark, a brand, just sort of a huckster dog and pony show, Vegas greatest hits act of a non-stop touring, sell a lot of tickets and t-shirts type thing, and I kind of lose interest. I did, strangely enough, quite like their 45 from last year, 2020, which Ghost Town, that's the specials, but it was I can't remember the name of the thing, but anyway, it's really good, I think. But all the albums that I didn't buy, but I did hear because, like I said, a friend of mine was still buying their albums. So I just wasn't impressed. So I'm going to have one more Rolling Stones review of something from a box set coming up. But as far as all the Voodoo Lounge, Babylon, Steel Wheels, Bigger Bang, whatever, I don't have. I've got Big Bang, but I don't want to do that out of order, and I'm really not in the mood to go listen to it again. Someday I might, and I might do a review. I'm just not in the mood to go spend money on Steel Wheels and all that stuff. I might someday down the road, but not anytime soon. So, like I said, I've got one more review coming up for the Stones, but I'm not going to get into Steel Wheels and all. I think Jeff Calico Silver, I think he's going to be reviewing those albums if he hadn't already, because he's got them. So there's plenty of people doing reviews. I think if you're interested in those latter day albums, really not, to be honest. But great band. Just at this point, though, this album is terrible, and I kind of lose interest after that. So, Dirty Work, I'll give it a 2. This is for Rolling Stones completists only. You know, the hardcore fans that just have to have absolutely everything ever associated with the band. For anybody else, you don't need this album any more than Douglas Bader needs a new pair of shoes. It's a waste of time. If you want to get into the Stones, definitely don't start here. There's a lot of better albums. So, hope everybody has a good weekend. Sorry I had to take a phone call there in the middle of all that, but I didn't want to cut this off and restart, so not the most professional video job here, and cost them that, but take care.